Good afternoon. I recognize that some of you are in time zones that are 6:30 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, just after midnight. So I can just ask all of you to please stand. Can I ask you to all take a very deep breath and let it out? Let's take another one. Let it out. If you feel comfortable to yawn, just cover your mouth and take in as much oxygen as you can. Stretch out. Shake your legs. Shake your arms. And let's take a seat. Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rushdi Nackerdien. I'm the Senior Global Advisor for Training and Capacity Development at IFES. And we are having a very important discussion this afternoon. In 30 minutes, we're going to talk about youth engagement and political participation. Globally, we're at a time when young people across the globe are at the forefront of social movements. We see climate action, addressing school shootings, challenging police brutality in countries like Nigeria, opposing tax hikes in countries like Kenya. Yet, paradoxically, and at the same time, we're also witnessing a decline in youth turnout in formal elections, revealing a very critical disconnect in traditional political engagement. Data from countries like France, the UK, Germany, and South Africa all show that young people between 18 and 24 are less likely to vote than those much older than them. This means young people are less likely to have a say in the key issues affecting them. In the US, with 41 million young people between 18 and 27 eligible to vote, almost half of them being youth of color, this represents a critical cohort of voters in tomorrow's elections. Our esteemed panelists today bring together unique perspectives on this issue, each contributing innovative approaches to not just voter education, but also civic education and youth empowerment. We are joined online by Emily White, partner at Collective Entertainment and founder of the IVoted Festival. Emily's voter engagement initiative has transformed music as a vehicle for political participation, creating the largest digital concert in history for the 2020 US elections. Next on stage with me is Dr. Greer Burroughs, Associate Professor at the College of New Jersey. With over 2 decades focused on civic education, Dr. Burroughs has worked extensively in curriculum development, both in the US and abroad in countries such as Georgia, Ukraine, Armenia, Serbia, and Bangladesh. Finally, on stage, we also have Dairanys Grullon-Virgil, the Associate Director of Alumni and Youth Voice at Generation Citizen. She's been a dedicated advocate for gender equality, education, civics, and the arts. Together, our 3 panelists offer a wealth of knowledge on how to engage and mobilize young people in today's political landscape. So for the next 30 minutes, let's dive into this conversation and explore how we can bridge the gap between youth-led activism and formal political engagement. We'll start off with Emily. Emily, you've been scoring the country over the past couple of days, running concerts, free concerts for young people. Tell us a little bit about how you leverage music and culture to create a lasting connection between young people and civic participation.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. So as mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of #IVoted Concerts. We produce data-driven concerts on US election nights and during early voting periods that the public gets into for free by submitting a selfie from outside their polling place or at home with a blank and unmarked ballot. They can also check their voter registration for free entry. Future voters get into our shows by letting us know what election they will be 18 for, and non-citizens and those ineligible to vote enter our concerts by sharing why they're excited to attend. So that way we're in compliance with US electoral law, and our concerts are open to everyone. MIT has shown that IVoted concerts increase voter turnout by over 7%, whereas traditional get out the vote drives do so by 0.5 to 1%. And that's because we book artists per the data based on what people are listening to where, because what people are listening to in Milwaukee, Wisconsin is different from Pittsburgh, where I am right now, is different from Atlanta. So that's always worked very well for us. And this year, I'm a visiting fellow at Johns Hopkins University's SNF Agora Institute, where our mission is to strengthen global democracy. And through my fellowship, we have analyzed the data on the top trending artists in each location to show which of the top trending artists will increase civic impact the most. And we do that by comparing each artist's unique fan demographics with local voter files to determine the artists that have the most low propensity voters. So for example, although Taylor Swift has the most listeners in Atlanta, Drake, Future, and The Weeknd can turn out more voters because Taylor's fans already vote. We're producing 18 data-driven concerts this fall. We're halfway through. We've got another one tonight in Pittsburgh, like I said, and we've got 8 more nationwide on election night tomorrow. But already we're seeing the data of our attendees, which is 90% of attendees at IVoted concerts are under the age of 30, and half of those are 18 to 24. So it's really, booking talent per the data instead of just, getting someone with a big social media following and kind of hoping for the best. And that's really what's made a difference, because 68% of young people in the United States attend concerts, but 30-some% vote. So not only are we bridging that gap and meeting potential young voters where they already are, we're getting really, really granular in the data. And the last thing I'll say about that is we've been doing some shows with an artist named T Grizzly that I can hear sound checking right now. And, you should see these kids just going nuts for him on a Tuesday night in Milwaukee. And, that's not an artist that I would necessarily know as a longtime music industry executive, but that's because there's 150,000 songs released a day, right? So that's why we really dig in on the data to determine what people are listening to where, and which of those artists have the most low propensity voters, and therefore those artists in producing these concerts can really make a difference.
A 7% increase is quite significant, the way that you describe it. How does that attendance to the concert and then voting translate into a longer term engagement post-elections?
Yeah, great question. So, and I'm sure some of my brilliant co-panelists can speak to this better than I, but a large determining factor on if someone becomes a lifelong voter is if they vote in the first few elections that they're eligible for. So, we want our shows to be inclusive regardless, but that's another reason why our shows are all ages. And the underage fans can get in by sharing what election they will be 18 for, what election they will be eligible for, because we really want to engage young people in the civic process, even if they're not old enough to vote. We want to, make it fun, make it cool, make it inclusive. And, the number one determining factor on if someone votes is if their community votes, right? And traditionally that's friends, family, religious affiliation. But, for anyone that has a music fan in their life, these music fan communities, or stan communities, as we might say with a slang term, are extremely powerful. Just really quickly, I was interviewing an award-winning journalist on the IVoted podcast in 2022. And she mentioned that her 18-year-old daughter, this was summer of 2022, her 18-year-old daughter hadn't registered to vote yet. And I thought, oh my gosh, if your kid isn't registered, like, we're in trouble. And then she said, oh, well, she spent all summer following around a band on tour called the Accidentals. And I smiled because the Accidentals were playing an IVoted concert because they're one of the top trending artists in Michigan, right? Like that's what that young person was engaged with that summer, instead of listening to her award-winning journalist mother to register to vote. So that's exactly what we're tapping into.
Great stuff. Let's turn to Greer. I mean, based on your experience kind of working internationally, how does civic education methods differ when engaging young people in different political and cultural settings?
So first of all, I want to thank you and the IFES for creating this panel, particularly at a conference dealing with elections. I always think that education is plays such an integral part in preparing the electorate who will vote. With that said, my work is also in the US as well as internationally, and you might be surprised to know that there's a commonality no matter where I'm working.
Okay.
And I will talk in a moment that we do contextualize, but the commonality really is based on the idea that we want young people to be informed citizens. We want them to use that vote in a way that it's coming from an informed position. And in order to do that, we need to develop certain skills, like critical thinking skills, analysis skills, research skills. We want them to be able to listen to different perspectives, to seek out different perspectives before forming an opinion. So that idea of how do we first create the informed electorate, I believe is really the role of my work, which is education. My work is centered on university level. I also believe, I believe this should be in all levels of education, but at the university level, the baseline is that we want students to have these skills, but we also want them to have knowledge of systems. So a lot of the places where I work, they are emerging or developing democracies, and sometimes the idea of what a democracy looks like is not as fully formed. So we need to give them education. We need to tell them what are democratic principles, what are democratic traditions, what do they look like in other contexts. So there's a certain amount of information that is global, that regardless of what country I'm in, we share the same global information. But then we do contextualize it for the area. And we have to pay attention to issues that are relevant in that context. I have a 22-year-old son, and I had conversations with him in the last few months about why he and his peers aren't feeling particularly engaged. And a lot of it really comes down to is they don't feel like the system is really working. And so one of the things that we need to do in our university courses is educate students about the systems, about what are some of the shortcomings of our systems, as well as the strengths. Because we want them to have more realistic expectations of the system. Because I think a lot of times people become disillusioned because they have unrealistic expectations of the system. So we need to provide that kind of baseline knowledge, but then we also need to excite them about issues that are relevant in their country and see how the system in their country can be used to help them move the needle. And it's difficult because sometimes they see the gap. They are learning all about what democracy looks like in other contexts, and they see a gap between the reality where they are. And so we really focus them also on analyzing, well, why does that gap exist? And what would it take to close that gap in some ways? So as I said, it's a little bit of a mix between this kind of universal, what is the fundamental knowledge, the fundamental skills, and then that contextualization that is going to really excite them about their context and also help them understand their context in a more realistic perspective.
Greer, can you share with us any kind of success stories, especially the university level kind of programs that you're running, any kind of anecdotes or research about some of that long-term commitment that you see after that awareness raising takes place?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because I also have the privilege of doing a lot of the focus groups with students in different countries, and I've analyzed a lot of the data on it. And we have students who have gone on to create their own NGOs, for instance.
Okay.
And so we have students who've created NGOs, for instance, in Ukraine. We have a very big success story where students created their own youth organization to provide civic education at the secondary level. They felt they were so inspired about the opportunity that they had, what they were able to learn at the university level, and they recognized that not everybody's going to have that opportunity. So they created their own NGO. It's fully operated by the students, and it's been operating now for, I think, 5 or 6 years. And some of the students, they're well now into their careers, and it's a student-led function, organization. I will say I was in Bangladesh this summer, and I actually was there at the time of the student uprising. And I met with students on a Saturday, just as things were really heating up. And I met with students who were graduates from the course that I'm affiliated with, the IFES course. And they were telling me very definitely why they felt that it was important for them to go protest, and how much the experience in the course had influenced that decision. And they recognized that change was not going to occur unless they participated. And so, there's a lot of other smaller, students have started recycling in their communities, or, so we have a lot of stories of success, and we see, again, some of that longevity.
Excellent. So we've now heard a little bit about using music. We've heard engagement at the university level. Let's turn to Dairanys to talk to us a little bit about the work that Generation Citizen has done, especially in terms of working with marginalized communities where political engagement might be low. Talk to us a little bit about the civics program that you're running in schools and so forth.
Hi, thank you everyone, and for those who stayed for this part of the conversation, and thank you for the invitation, IFES. So at Generation Citizen, the way that we have done this is through 2 steps. The first one this year, we started a campaign called RiseVote, and it's an acronym for Registering, Informing, Supporting, and Empowering Voters. And the idea of this campaign is to bring the type of resources for pre-registration and registration to our students and young people across the country. And these resources included a toolkit, which included language that also included the way that young people speak. And very innovative part of it, we included QR codes, which they can use with their phones to register to vote, to locate their polling stations, and voter registration information. Young people usually are on their phones, so we were trying to speak their language and use the tools and resources that they use on a daily basis. The second aspect of our work is to come to the geographic locations where they are. We work with teachers in rural, suburban, and urban spaces with our curriculum based on community civics, where students are able to identify community issues and work with teachers to identify those issues and find solutions within a democratic classroom, that the teacher is not dictating them what to do, but they're researching, they're having conversations, they're taking surveys. So it's an active participation, not passive, which I think it makes helps a lot. And also in our research, we have identified that the key aspect of equity in civics, it has to be inclusive, it has to be relevant, and it has to be, inclusive, relevant, and intergenerational as well. So what we need in terms of equity in civics as well, we need funding at the state and district and school level, in which schools, teachers, districts, and everyone feels empowered to, like my colleague said, have informed citizens. That's what civics does. It gives you the opportunity to learn what's happening in your community and to be an informed citizen. So when you go and vote, you have the information you need to make your voice heard.
Any specific examples that you can share with us where your community-based education has successfully empowered young people to take meaningful political action?
Absolutely. So the first thing I want to say as someone that works with young people is that we need to stop thinking of them as a monolithic group. Young people have different interests, they do things differently, and we should embrace that. There's nothing wrong with that. And what I have learned through my experience and the work that we do is that young people, what they need is an environment that elevates their voices and give them the tools to participate. And I can give you many different examples. So for example, for Civic Learning Week, we had a panel of students talking about the importance of civics education and how they're engaged in their community. And I can give you another example. We have Civic State, which is imagine is a science fair, but it's a science fair for civics. And basically, their students, they talk about their projects, they present it, and also they have community advisors. And in those projects, they continue to work on them, and they get success from bringing solar panels to their schools, bringing stop signs in intersections, to making changes in their school lunch. We need to think about impact in terms of what is it that young people want to impact, but also the local and state and city issues that they care, which sometimes we think about the big picture, federal, but there's so many local issues that young people are already involved, that they care about, and we need to provide that space for them to continue making their voice heard.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Emily. The approach that you've taken in terms of using music, you talk about that. It's an initiative that have been working on here in the US. I mean, given the fact that we have an audience drawn from around the world, 60 different countries attending this conference, what lessons or approaches do you think would be relevant for them to take away to different countries to engage young people globally?
Yeah, I used to be a global tour manager. So I've been all over the world producing concerts for decades. And we've had interest from Greece, Canada, and Luxembourg to produce IVoted concerts in their countries. So we would absolutely like to utilize our data to increase civic engagement and overall voter turnout in really any democratic country that wants to work with us. We know how to really nail target demographics. So if you tell us, who you want to be at those concerts, we know exactly how to do that. I mean, not to digress too much, but there's a great climate organization that had us produce a few impact concerts that were free, that folks got into by opting in to learn about high-paying clean energy jobs in New Orleans and in Detroit. And so for the New Orleans show, they wanted women and non-binary attendees. And so we looked at the data on the top trending artists in New Orleans with the most femme listeners, and we had 90% femme attendees. So this is something we would absolutely love to partner and work with different democratic countries on to help increase voter turnout and civic engagement in your countries as well.
Greer, you posed a question before we came in, and that's kind of, what's the connection between things like voter education and then the civic education, which continues further? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the conundrums of democracy is that we give people the power. And I say that in all honesty. It was something that the founders of the United States were very concerned with, this idea of, can people use that power responsibly? Will they have enough information to use that power? And I know much of the world scratches their head at our electoral college system, but one of the reasons we instituted the electoral college was to kind of as a safeguard for that, because the founders were aware of this idea that there could be this tyranny of the majority, and that that majority might not, may not actually be informed or educated. So to me, as a lifetime educator, I am more concerned with educated votes than I am with just voter turnout because of that reason, that I want people to really understand the stakes. I want them to understand what the structure that they're living within, how that structure operates. I want them to understand, you know, like the US election right now, we hear so much about just people are voting based on like a single issue, like the economy, like inflation. And a lot of times when you dig in and you talk with people, they don't even really understand what role the president plays in influencing inflation. Yeah. So I think that education to me is such an integral piece of preserving and strengthening democracy. So I think that any efforts at increasing or improving electoral systems should also consider how we're going to have that educated electorate.
Dairanys, what advice would you give countries that are really struggling with young voters in suffering from really poor socioeconomic conditions? How would you attract them to actually feel that sense of agency?
Good question. I don't think it's only countries are still developing. I think it's an issue of how we see the role of young people in general. I laugh because a lot of people say, like, what I see in my work is that people want young people representation. But the fact is that sometimes we're not ready because that requires to navigate power dynamics. And what does that mean? Take or give away power, and sometimes a lot of us are not comfortable with that. And when young people sit at the table, sometimes we just want that representation, but that does not mean that they're active actors in what we're working on. And we conducted a research which actually focused on this. I was so happy to collaborate with Co-Generate and New Caucus, and we interview a diverse group of civic organizations exploring the role of cross-generational collaboration. And the reality is that the first thing that came up is that, are we willing to give that power dynamic? Are we willing to really co-create spaces with young people in which their voices are not nice to have, but actually co-create the conference, co-create the programming, co-create the curriculum? That's a very hard thing to do. Look at the budget together. And the thing is that sometimes we're like, oh, they're young, they don't know anything. When you actually sit with them and you foster that space, a lot of amazing things can happen. And I see that at Generation Citizen through work and at Civics Day.
Sorry,
No
because
problem.
emotion. Let me go figure that out, but I can hear you if you ask a question.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Just had to move.
Emily, you've indicated you're halfway through your series of concerts. I mean, what's lying ahead for the next couple of concerts? I mean, and maybe link that with that continuing process of after Election Day.
Yeah, definitely. So what we have ahead are 2 arena shows tomorrow night. We'll have a Boogie with the Hoodie at Desert Diamond Arena in Phoenix, and we have Glorilla in Southern California, which you know, that show's really significant too, because that concert promoter knows that California might determine the Congress in the U.S., but it's not going to determine the presidency. But she said she really wants to fix the potholes in Southern California, you know? And then we have shows in Cleveland, Austin, Texas, Philadelphia, in North Carolina, Milwaukee, Las Vegas. And then what we'll be doing in 2025, we definitely want to do IVoted concerts for every election, including, you know, local elections that are sometimes determined by the amount of people on this panel. But there are, you know, nonprofits and different causes interested in our data beyond voting. So like I said, you know, there were all these new jobs created through the Inflation Reduction Act here in the United States. And a lot of people didn't know about these clean energy jobs. So that's why we were tapped to produce concerts to appeal to young people in Detroit and then women in New Orleans that folks got into for free by opting in to learn about clean energy jobs. So we're going to be producing about 25 of those in 2025. And we're evolving into impact concerts where you have to do something tangible to get in for free. But like I said, we're just always going to be data driven with the bookings because it's like I'm playing, if people know Moneyball, right? Like I'm playing Moneyball a little bit over here. But I know I mentioned T. Grizzly, who I've just seen all over our data. You know, this is anecdotal, but there's always an artist that stands out to me in the data that I just see everywhere, every election year. And so in 2020, an artist I haven't heard of. So in 2020, that was the artist Jelly Roll, who since has gotten very big. And in 2022, that was the artist Noah Khan, who has since gotten very big. And for me this year, that's T. Grizzly. And so just to see these kids screaming and going nuts for him has been really, really exciting. And it was fun to tell him that and tell his team, like, hey, do you know why you're here? And I'll just add one last thing. Our talent buying partner is Live Nation Urban. And the president said to me, oh, I'm not surprised he's going off in your data. Do you know why? I said, no. And he said he's very big in the Twitch streaming and gaming community. So again, we're tapping into fans that we might not know about otherwise, but that's also what the modern music industry is. It's very long tail. So we're excited to produce more impact concerts. We're excited to produce local IVoted concerts and build into tours and more arena shows for 2026 and beyond.
Thanks for that, Emily. We draw to a close. We've had our panelists now speak about the music industry, university, as well as community-based actions. A lot of this driven by evidence, raising awareness and education, tackling issues that resonate with young people and getting them empowered with a sense of agency, doing a variety of different things, starting with voting, and a whole array of things which come along with that. Let's give the panel a hand, and we thank them for their inputs.